It's the Boris Dirk podcast. We are back today with some burning questions for the 24-25 regular season and playoffs. We're talking players, we're talking teams, we're talking overall dynamics. Max and I both came up with a bunch, and I think we're just going to rapid fire go back and forth. Some of these will sort of pose rhetorically, others we might get into for a couple minutes, but the goal is just to kind of run around the league and hit on a lot of the stuff that we're most excited to follow this year. Max, how are you?
I'm good. They are training for Fleet Week here in San Francisco, so you may hear fighter jets flying by. Do not be alarmed. But yes, apologies in advance, but it's beautiful here.
I want to start by talking Milwaukee for a second, or 10 minutes. We'll see. Questions have been asked of the depth of Doc Rivers' recent playoff resume, of Giannis's recent injury history. I think these concerns are valid. I also think they're a bit overblown. And my main question with the Bucks is simply, how much do their 2 through 4 have left in the tank? You've got Dame at 34, coming off a disappointingly volatile year on offense. Really bad year, even for his standards on defense. Middleton at 33, coming off double ankle surgery. And Brook Lopez, who to his credit, has only missed 7 games in the last 2 seasons combined, but is a 36-year-old, 280-pound man. So I'm just wondering, does Milwaukee's veteran core outside of Giannis have enough sheer juice to not only secure a favorable seed, but to last through a theoretical game 100, deep into the playoffs against younger teams like New York or Orlando? Come spring and early summer, can Dame consistently exploit the offensive advantages created by Giannis? Can Middleton guard full time or at least switch on to dangerous opposing wings? Can Lopez protect the rim and space the floor for Giannis at his age? I think Milwaukee's season hinges on this trio being not only healthy, but near their prime levels of production. And if this Bucks team wins the title, I did the math, they will have had the oldest 2 through 4 of any champ since the 2014 Spurs, which is scary because that makes it seem like a real long shot, and we're still talking prime Giannis and a top 3 or 4 guy in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, my question that was similar to this for Milwaukee was simply, is Dame time still ticking?
Yeah.
Clearly, he's still a good player. He made the All-Star team last year, and his numbers weren't terrible, but he was a ways off from the year before Dame, which when Milwaukee traded for him, Dame was coming off maybe the best offensive season of his career, even if it was on a middling to bad Blazers team. But his shooting, his rim pressure, his free throws were all at career highs. And last year it dipped. And he's been very open of the fact that he was not in the shape he needed to be in because he was worried about getting hurt and didn't train as hard as he usually does in the offseason. All the noise is that he's back to his normal self. So we have to see if he's back to being a top 10 to 15 player in the NBA, then they are firmly in that upper echelon of East contenders. They have as good a shot of anyone at competing and knocking off Boston. If he's not, if he's more like last year again, or even if it's more symptomatic of a decline, and he's more like the 15th to 30th best player in the league, maybe more 20 to 30, then things start to look a lot more bleak around Giannis because you're not going to. Middleton and Lopez at this point are too old to realistically get any return from them. If you need to retool on the fly, they have no assets because they gave them all up for Dame. So it really all comes down to, can Dame be the guy that they traded for? I have faith that he can be. Just I don't think he's old enough for the decline to really be hitting so hard yet. And I think there was just a lot going on last year, both in his personal life. The Milwaukee coaching situation was a fiasco from the start, and the sort of in shape question as well. But yeah, obviously Middleton and Lopez are keys as well. Middleton, you mentioned the double ankle surgeries. He has actually been very good in the last 2 playoffs, even though it's only been 1 round in each. But last year, despite all of his injury management throughout the season, he was at 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists in the playoffs on good shooting splits. Like, he still is a high level shot maker when you get him into the playoffs and in clutch situations. They just have to make sure they get there and that they're not really crawling from the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff bracket. And that really hinges on how Dame can help carry them in the regular season.
No doubt. Hit me.
All right. I'm going to start off with just how good is Victor Wembanyama already? And this sort of dovetails with another one of my questions of is anyone just going to seize the face of the league moniker this year? And I think if anyone's going to like grab it in a chokehold, Victor's got a good chance to do that. Last year, as a rookie, he averaged 21 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists with over 3.5 blocks as a rookie. So, second year, like, what are we looking at? Is he averaging 25 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 blocks? Like, I don't have a stat head subscription to be able to filter historical stat lines. I would guess that that stat line has never been put up in NBA history. Like is that stat line, like is that already better than Anthony Davis? Like where are we going in year two of Wembanyama? I'm expecting he'll be somewhere around all NBA third team this year, which honestly, if you look on basketball Twitter, is like on the low end of what people are expecting this year. Some people are thinking he could be a top 5 to 10 player already in year two. I think CP is going to bring the most out of him offensively. He's probably already the best defensive player in the league or close. Um, and I just cannot wait to see what he looks like in year two, especially with how he's bulked up, some of the FIBA Olympics experience over the summer. That's going to be one of the things I'm watching early on, almost more than anything.
Nobody covers space like him. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't watch the preseason game, but I saw highlights because, of course, I'm keeping tabs on Steph Castle. And Chris Paul threw him this like Mahomes-esque shovel alley-oop from the baseline that got me really juiced. It's going to be fun to watch. There have been, I think, some rumblings, like some people asking, what if the Spurs are already like a play-in or even a fringe playoff team because Wembanyama is that good and like Devin Vassell is really good and they have some vets around him now, and the young guys are only getting better. I'm not ready to get there just because the West is so stacked, but I totally agree with you. Wembanyama looks so good. I wouldn't be surprised by second team either. And he's the favorite in every sports book to win Defensive Player of the Year. So the hype is off the charts. All right. I'm going to go with a sort of rhetorical question, just posing it. We've talked about this a little bit following this massive Knicks Wolves trade, but I'm excited to see whether the Knicks will max out with Cat at the 4, playing beside Mitchell Robinson, or maybe someone else not currently on the Knicks roster. Uh, or is Cat able to play the 5 defensively for a team with real title hopes, which the Knicks are just all in at this point. I think it's conference finals or bust for this roster construction. And I'm just really interested to see like what the best version of them is. Is it Cat at the 5 or is it Cat next to a big who's doing the defensive anchoring?
Yeah, I had a variant of this question of just are OG, Bridges, and Hart good enough defenders to insulate Cat and Brunson on
Yeah.
defense and still have a top 10 defensive unit. I think if you were going to try to pick three wings to put between subpar point guard and center defenders, you'd have a hard time coming up with a three-man combination better than Hart, Bridges, and Anunoby. But at the same time, center is the most important position on defense on an NBA court, and Cat has been a below average defensive center for his entire career. So that is the key. Shams came out today and he said Mitchell Robinson is going to be out for the rest of the calendar year of 2024. So they're expecting him back at some point in January, probably. But Shams also did say when he comes back to expect to see a fair amount of those double big lineups of Cat and Robinson together. And I really like that idea as a Knicks fan. That is an insane amount of size to throw out on the floor between Bridges, Anunoby, Cat, and Robinson. And the spacing with Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, and Cat is good enough that you can have that too big look. And yeah, that is the key for this Knicks team because I think they're going to be dynamite offensively. We've already started to see flashes of it in the preseason where they're going to get that Cat Brunson pick and roll to a point where it's one of the most elite actions in the NBA. I think I would place a good bet that if the core pieces stay healthy, they're going to be a top 5 offense. And it's really just a question if they can get their defense to like 8th or 9th, then they're a legit title contender with like a top 3 offense, let's say, as opposed to if they're trying their best to like cover and scramble behind Cat, but it comes out to, the 15th best defense in the league, then you're looking more at, okay, more of a one-way team that can't quite get over that hump that Boston has gotten to where they're elite truly on both ends.
Yeah, and at Mitch's size and injury track record, like finding out he's not coming back until 2025 is terrifying. Like
Yeah.
there's no guarantee that he'll be himself in the most important parts of next season. And Minnesota just gave you an awesome blueprint for like maximizing Cat in the playoffs. Chances are Cat is best off playing next to a bona fide rim protecting five. So yeah, the center situation in New York will be interesting to track. I love Mitch. I think his mobility is a little bit underrated. His energy is incredible. He's so competitive, and the fan base loves him. Like the energy around Mitch as a Knick is so great that I really hope he gets healthy and is
Yeah.
able to be that guy. But they're gonna need someone, because even if Cat plays the five for certain matchups, like you just need that look,
Yeah.
whether it's Mitch or someone else.
And Mitch, funny, like we don't usually use this term for these types of players, but he's really proven to be a playoff riser over the course of his career. Like
Yeah.
against Cleveland, he might have been there. It was him or Josh Hart was their second best player in that first round series a couple years ago. And he absolutely physically punked the front line of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen to the point that like they just completely crumbled and the Knicks ran away with that series down the stretch. Last year against Philly, he did a much better job of guarding Embiid one-on-one than Hartenstein did throughout that series. And Hartenstein offers a ton in terms of the offense and his mobility and things like that. But purely in that Embiid matchup, Robinson got the best of him on a number of occasions. And we don't have to talk about how Robinson's current injury may be linked to Embiid pulling him down out of the air during that series. But Robinson, I really hope the Knicks keep him around and get a look at what that lineup looks like with him and Cat together, because I think that could be a really dynamite lineup. I have a similar question about a Western Conference team. Can Dallas defend well enough with Klay Thompson on the floor? I think this is the key question that separates them from, being a second round Western Conference Finals team to a legit title contender. Um, I think there are a good bet to have the best offense in the league. It's a completely unguardable starting lineup because Luka is already an unsolvable offensive problem unto himself when you surround him with just average shooting, as we saw last year once they were able to make some trades and shake things up. But a Luka Derek Lively pick and roll where you have an elite lob threat, an elite on-ball scorer in Luka, and an elite lob passer in Luka, with Klay Thompson spacing, who for all the flack he's gotten is still one of the best spot-up shooters in the whole league. He still shoots 40% from three on a really high volume. You've got to that for a defense to worry about. They can't help off him. You've got Kyrie on the other side of the court, who is just waiting for the ball to be swung around to him, for the defense to be scrambling, and for him to attack against that. And then you have PJ Washington, who's a really solid shooter, who's going to just get wide open, check the wind, corner threes all season long. That is an unguardable unit. If they're number one in offense, it's similar to the Knicks. Can they just be like around 10th in defense? And I think Klay is the limiting factor in that.
To your point, the offense has gotten better by adding Klay, Najee Marshall, Quentin Grimes. You and I both think Olivier Maxence Prosper is going to be a factor at some point. It might take him a little longer to break into the rotation than we'd predicted when he was a prospect coming out of Marquette. I think the offense could be even better than what we saw last year. So I'm with you. And they still have Daniel Gafford too. Like they still have
Yeah.
48 minutes of athletic rim running, rim protecting centers, which is exactly what Luka needs. And he'll continue to maximize those two guys, Lively and Gafford. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's a little fun one. What if it turns out everyone was wrong about this draft class and it's just really solid? And I
Yes.
know you had this somewhere on your list too. So Anthony Bennett at least had real swag coming out of UNLV in 2013. Like Riza Shea is the least hyped number one pick I can remember. And I'm not the biggest Riza Shea guy. I know you aren't either. I thought it was a significant reach by Atlanta. But this class is full of dudes I love who, and some of them have shown out already in the preseason. I just think one of Steph Castle, Reed Shepherd, Donovan Clingan, Bob Carrington on the Wizards. Like I just see like multiple all-stars coming out of this lottery. There's just been so much doubt surrounding this draft class. And based on the summer league, some of the early preseason stuff that I've seen, I'm just open to the idea that there are a lot of sheeple, sometimes ourselves included, in the draft community. And this draft might just be really good and kind of par for the course.
I had a similar question. I've always thought that this was a great role player draft. It was, it was widely said that this draft is kind of like if you checked off the top, 5 to 7 guys from a normal draft and then had the rest of the draft from there. But what's lost in that is I think there were way more guys in this draft who had like top 18 quality than there were in a normal draft. There were probably, 30 of those guys, maybe not 30, but like 25 at least of guys who I thought could be like top 18 quality players in a normal draft. And a lot of these guys also are older, more ready to contribute right now, and can contribute to playoff rotations right away. Like Tristan da Silva is the first name I'm seeing. Take a drink if you're listening at home. But Zach Edey is going to be a starter on probably a top 4 to 6 Western Conference team.
Yep.
From the jump. 4-year college player. Same thing with Dalton Connect. He's coming in as an older rookie. He's going to be ready to contribute to the Lakers right away. Even just further down the draft board, the Thunder drafted AJ Mitchell, who I think is a really good backup point guard prospect. Same with Tyler Kolek for the Knicks. Like Jared McCain is going to, I think, be able to come in and get minutes. There's a lot of guys with just really NBA ready skill sets of 3-and-D or defense and passing or size that I think, for neglected to mention Jalen Tyson, I think he's another one of those guys. I think that we're going to be looking around in February and there's going to be a lot of discourse of like, wait, I thought this draft was supposed to suck. Look at all of these rookies who are contributing in like really valuable ways. What it is it's a class with a ton of like Jaime Jaquez type guys who weren't that highly touted as prospects, but you put them on an NBA court and they're going to know what to do right off the bat. I think there are like, off the top of my head, 5 or 6 guys in this class that I think could have a similar impact to Jaquez or Pajemski in their first years. And that's pretty rare for a draft class.
Devin Carter on the Kings tore his labrum. They're saying like at least 6 months out. If he gets back in time, he is a playoff type guy. Like he will do things for Sacramento, I promise. I had him at number 6. I think they got him at 13. All right, hit me with a burning question.
Can Christian Brown, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, Dario Saric, and Russell Westbrook for the Denver Nuggets approximate 2 years ago's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Bruce Brown, and Jeff Green? If they can, this team is firmly a top-tier title contender. And if they can't, they'll probably lose in the second round. Denver has just seen their depth kind of leak out the door the last couple years between Brown, KCP, and Jeff Green. And they're banking on their young draft picks of the last few years, along with some veteran flyers, to be able to fill in those gaps. And this is still a unit with Jokic, Porter, Gordon, and Murray that's one of the best top 4s in the entire NBA. And if you could just tell me that they have a passable 5 to 7 rotation that teams aren't just going to ignore as liabilities or attack as liabilities, then I can very well see the argument for them coming out of the West. But if those guys look a lot like they looked last year, then I don't really see the path for them to come out of the West.
I had a Nuggets question too. I agree with you on the depth question. Like, can a guy like Strawther go from almost no significant role to key rotation piece, potentially a starter if he wants it? Will the real Jamal Murray please stand up? That was a question I had in my Google Doc. I just don't know which Jamal Murray we're getting this year in this regular season and playoffs. Let me take you back for a second, because in 2019, Jamal Murray at 22 years old burst onto the scene in round 2 versus Portland. I was visiting family in Portland at the time. I had awesome seats with my dad, and you could tell that there was a special competitive will to the Jokic Murray combo. Like Murray wasn't always shooting efficiently in that Blazers series, but he's always been the kind of guy who could be like 6 for 18. And in the fourth quarter, he's just going to make two like insanely tough mid range shots to force a timeout, silence the crowd, and get his team back in the game for the final few minutes. It's just always been in his DNA. And I remember watching Murray and Jokic in that earlier version of the team with Will Barton, Paul Millsap, Malik Beasley, and I just saw the it factor. And he was awesome. I think it was his first playoffs, 22 years old, and his numbers were really solid. In 2020, he goes nuclear in the bubble versus Donovan Mitchell in Utah. Everyone remembers that. Like they were just dropping 50 burgers left and right. It felt like they eventually get knocked out by the future champ Lakers. And then, it was a scary 2 years. Injuries kept Murray out of the playoffs in 21 and 22. But in 23, the stars align, they win the title, and Murray is Jokic's spectacular clutch sidekick again. But here we are, 2024. He has his worst playoffs ever. There are injuries, multiple injuries. He can't create separation. At the Olympics, it's the same story. People say he's out of shape. And the Murray takes are flying all over the place these days. And I don't know which guy we're getting. I pray that this isn't like a weird young guy injury story where like he's not quite the same anymore. I think just with modern medicine and like his dedication to his craft, I think that's so unlikely. Like my guess is that we're going to see more prime Jamal Murray. But the depth question that you just asked, which is so valid, and also like I think the first thing people think of when they think of the Nuggets heading into this year, it's all moot if Jamal Murray isn't absolutely himself. And I just really hope that the Olympic stuff was kind of a blip in the long-term story of an absolute playoff killer.
Yeah, and he was a big part of the reason that they lost that Minnesota series. And he's, aside from their depth, absolutely. If Murray and Jokic are playing at the level that they were playing in the 2023 playoffs, especially like Murray had like an outer body experience against the Lakers, but the way they're playing in the finals against Miami, they can drag a subpar supporting cast to the finals. Like it's a good enough two-man game with Porter and Gordon that they can do that. They need both to be able to be on par with the top teams of the league, Oklahoma City, Boston, whoever else rises into that crop. They need elite Murray and at least solid supporting cast. So we will see. Your question is a variant of my question for someone else. So I'm going to steal your wording. Will the real Tyrese Haliburton please stand up? Everyone knows the story of Tyrese Haliburton last year. Elite to start the year, suffers a hamstring injury, is dealing with coming back from that and the lingering effects, and has a dip in production. And then the playoffs roll around and he's good, but not quite as good as he was early on in the year. The stats are pretty striking. Pre-injury, he averaged 24 points and 13 assists. Post-injury, that dropped to 17 and 10. So drop at 7 in points, 3 in assists, which is closer to the real one. Pre-injury, borderline top 10 player, all NBA first team level guy, elite offensive engine type guy, like, in the offensive engine category for the first half of last year as Luka, Steph, Jokic, LeBron. He was in that category. Second half of the year, more like a fringe all-star, really good guy, really good player, still could make, an all-NBA third team, but not that sort of alpha level offensive player that he was showing early in the year. When I was saying watching him in the in-season tournament, it reminded me of watching like young Steph, where you felt like this was just something that you hadn't seen before that was taking the NBA by storm as like a new way of playing. The Pacers need him to be pre-injury Tyrese for their any future title aspirations they have, because history has shown you need a top 10 guy or someone who's close with an elite supporting cast to be able to go the distance. And Haliburton was not close to that level of player for the second half of last year. So curious to see this year, which one is closer to the real thing? Is it playoff Haliburton, which was kind of in the middle? Is it regular season post-injury? Is it pre-injury superstar Haliburton? That is going to be huge for if this Pacers team was just a flash in the pan last year, or if they actually are building something sustainable here.
No notes. I've said many times on the pod that I think the key thing for Haliburton will be as he gets more mature, stronger, does he have the scoring gravity to be the engine behind a contender? I know that he could be the second best player on a legit contender. Like we've seen that talent. But Siakam was the best player for them in the playoffs, especially when we're talking two-way stuff. And all the best primary ball handlers in recent NBA history like have that really profound scoring weight and kind of generate advantages for their team around that. I'm not saying there's no room anymore for an absolutely elite vision point guard, which is what Haliburton is. But you gotta be able to penetrate consistently and create separation to activate the passing and all the things and the creativity, the things that make Tyrese Haliburton really special. Let's let's go to a bottom dweller real quick.
Mm.
Because we've been talking about some really good players and teams. How about this? Can Josh Giddey be the Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold? This is good morning radio right here. Sam Darnold of the NBA. Obviously, Giddey has already shown an ability to put up monster regular season numbers, but can he rehab his stock in Chicago, have his Pacers Oladipo-esque moment, and maybe even ignite a trend that mirrors the thriving fresh start QBs in the NFL?
I love this one. I love this.
And I think it's just a fascinating case study. More than anything, I just want to know like what Giddey's trade stock is in a year. There were some interesting reactions to that, to the Caruso Giddey trade. Like I think a lot of Thunder fans, Giddey fans would have expected Chicago to include the draft capital. It was OKC that did. Caruso's an awesome player, but young, massive creators like Giddey are rare. And it just goes back to this fascinating existential question we always have about NBA team building, which is, and Zach Lowe has articulated it as well as anyone, like if Josh Giddey is like the 12th best creator on the ball in the world, like, does that make him less valuable than Alex Caruso? And
Mm-hmm.
I think we're just going to find out a lot about the trade market, what Josh Giddey can be with a team that's more centered on everything that makes him great. And yeah, I'm excited for all of it.
Yeah, that's not one I had on my list, but I like it. And in general, and we're kicking around the idea of doing a rescue draft at some point this season of guys we think need to be rescued from their current situations. And that sort of ties in with like what they call the second draft in the NBA of teams
Yep.
taking flyers on former lottery picks in distressed situations. Sometimes it pans out. Trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Victor Oladipo, for instance, he went to a new team and really broke out as like an all-star before he got injured. Sometimes it doesn't work out, like the Knicks trading for Dennis Smith Jr., who was like a distressed lottery asset, and then it turned out he just wasn't that level of player, though he's, carved out at least a decent role for himself now.
Yeah. I remember when Portland got Kansas Thomas Robinson after just hadn't worked out at his first couple stops. As a fan, you really talk yourself into it.
You
Again,
do.
Giddey isn't one of these guys because like we've seen Giddey can average near a triple double
Yeah.
with any significant usage rate. He's so creative. He's underratedly like 6'9". The shooting comes and goes, and defensively he's subpar. But the creativity at that size, he's now next to an elite shooter in Kobe White, and if Zach LaVine is finally healthy, another elite shooter in LaVine, and a five who sometimes spaces the floor in Vucevic. Like there's a dimension where this really works for Giddey, and it doesn't mean the Bulls are a dangerous team.
I don't think he's ever going to be a really good shooter, but I would like to see him improve on his handle. I think he can be a little stiff with his handle as a primary guy, which you'd like that to be a little bit smoother. And I'd like him to improve and get really good at that kind of in between floater push hook type shot that like Luka makes a living off of in that sort of long mid-range area. It's a shot I hate to bring up the B name. It's a shot that Ben Simmons never developed, which I always thought was a lot more important to his actual development than a three. Like everyone focuses on, oh, Ben Simmons took a three, but it's a lot more important that he can get a mismatch, a smaller guard to the elbow, and be able to finish consistently over him, whether with a turnaround or a hook or a floater, whatever it may be. That's a shot that Giddey is gaining familiarity and comfortability with, but is not totally there. So that's something I want to see.
Yeah, and Giddey was set up to succeed in the Olympics and showed a lot of stuff. So, yeah, maybe a roster and a system that caters to his strengths is going to unlock some of the best of what we saw in his time in OKC. All right, your turn.
Speaking of Oklahoma City, is there actually parity in the NBA, or is it just a Boston Celtics Oklahoma City Thunder collision course this season?
Yeah, or yeah,
I I don't know
uh,
if you've been following the starting lineup debates for the Oklahoma City Thunder on Twitter, but to just actually see all of the names is insane. We know they're going to start Shea, Dort, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. The candidates for that fifth spot, and this may vary night to night, are Alex Caruso, who started on a championship team, Isaiah Hartenstein, who started last year on the Knicks in a team that, if healthy, would have been a conference finals team, Aaron Wiggins, who's turned into a really good 3-and-D role player and probably might fit the best with that lineup of anyone.
zero weaknesses.
Zero weaknesses. There's a good chance that they're bringing their two prized offseason acquisitions of Caruso and Hartenstein that were universally applauded as like, this is exactly what this team needs. There's a good chance they bring both of those guys off the bench for a lot of games this season. And that is just an insane level of depth. And it's not just middle of the team depth. They also have Shea, who's, I think, a no doubt about it, top four player in the NBA. And from the preseason, looks to have potentially smoothed out the release on his 3-point jumper, which was, if anything, like the one thing holding him back on the offensive end. They've got Jalen Williams, who this podcast has been higher on for longer than anyone out there in the public sphere. And I am fully ready for, especially if they're going to be the one seed and coaches like to reward multiple all-stars from a one seed, for Jalen Williams and or Chet Holmgren to make the all-star team this year and potentially push for all NBA spots. They've got that and an insane amount of depth. Plus, that doesn't even get to Isaiah Joe, who's one of the best shooters in the NBA, Cason Wallace, who was already in that like Hawkes class of legit contributors to winning teams as a rookie. But unlike Hawkes, was like 19 or 20 years old and is young, getting better, getting stronger. He put on a ton of muscle in the offseason, and he's going to be like their eighth or ninth man. They just have an insane level of depth. I haven't talked about Boston yet. We all know how good Boston is. They completely ran through the Eastern Conference last year, albeit playing some injured teams, but they were by far the best team in the East last year. And I think OKC has a chance to be, maybe not by far, but by a healthy margin, the best team in the West. And while we talk about it as being a parity-rich league with a lot of really good teams, I do think it's possible that we look up as we get towards the playoffs and we're like, these two teams are clearly the two best teams in the NBA.
It's the fact that they couldn't get to the conference finals last year and they're so damn young. I did the math on age, and I'm pretty sure if OKC won the title in 2025, they'd be one of, if not the youngest champion since the 1977 Portland Trailblazers. They'd be like top three or four. It's hard to find average ages, in part just because some people do team average age weighted on playing time and stuff like that. But yeah, this would be one of the least experienced, youngest NBA champions ever. But the age probably took a little bump up with the additions of Caruso and iHeart. And listen, I'm all in on the Thunder. Have been. I had them as a conference finalist last year. Somehow they exceeded my expectations, took the one seed, and still didn't get as far as I predicted them to in the playoffs. I think they are the team to beat in the West. But let me play devil's advocate for a second, because you're paying iHeart $30 million this year. And based on their cap sheet, like it just made total sense, like no brainer acquisition. But can the Thunder actually play Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein together the way that everyone is talking about that as like their new strongest potential look? Last year, Chet shot 37% from three on 4.3 attempts per game, right? So that's awesome for a center, decent even for a forward. But Chet's shot release was slow last year, seems to have gotten slower based on some videos I've seen online this summer. And more importantly, the Pelicans and Mavs weren't aggressively closing out on Chet in the playoffs. Like he still hasn't earned that defensive respect. He isn't really morphing the shapes of defenses as a 3-point threat, at least yet. Meanwhile, despite all of the whispers of Isaiah Hartenstein's long range shooting potential, he's been a non-shooter from three his entire career. And if that changes, still nobody will be respecting him from deep anytime soon. SGA and J-Dub thrive in the in-between spaces. They love to cook from the mid-range. And I just think it's a valid question that I haven't seen asked enough, whether Chet and Ihart together on the floor poses spacing issues for OKC's lead creators. Again, this is an embarrassment of riches. These are good problems to have. But there are just going to be pockets of the season where Chet isn't making threes. Like I don't believe he's a knockdown 3-point shooter, even though he was hot for most of last year. And that's been an issue for Cleveland. Like Cleveland been waiting for Mobley to have the 3-point shot because it'll open up so much for their guards. And like, Allen is one of their 5 best players. Like you don't want to bench Allen or Mobley. And yeah, Hartenstein is just so damn good that like you're going to want to play him in most closing minutes. And I wonder whether he and Chet can coexist on offense.
Yeah. Few counters to that. First, I think their best two-way lineup is probably going to be last year's starters with Caruso in there instead of Giddey. And just you have your top 3 offense, top 5 defense from last year. I think it was actually top 3 in both. And you're going to get better on defense swapping Giddey for Caruso. And you're going to get better on offense, probably swapping Giddey for Caruso as well, just with the way that their offense fits together. Caruso is a better shooter. So I think that will probably be their closing lineup against most teams, not like Denver teams, like against teams that don't have a bruising center, like against the Lakers, against Denver, against Sacramento, maybe Minnesota. They can put out the double big lineup, but I think in most cases they'll probably close with Caruso or Wiggins. But the counter with the Hartenstein lineup is the Thunder were a top 3 offense last year starting Josh Giddey. And that, I think, is a guy who gets a similar level of attention on the perimeter as Hartenstein gets. And Hartenstein, I should say. And Hartenstein brings an offensive rebounding component that they just did not have last year. They were the third worst team last year in offensive rebound percentage. The Knicks were the best in large part because of Hartenstein, Mitchell Robinson, and Josh Hart. So I believe in that lineup offensively because we saw the Thunder could still have an elite offense last year starting Josh Giddey. And I think Hartenstein brings a lot to the table in terms of offensive rebounding that Giddey didn't bring. So I think that lineup I would bet on to be better at offense than the starters from last year. Plus, that's not what you have to fall back on. Like you have other options as far as Caruso, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Cason Wallace, if he's feeling it. Like they can go a lot of different directions. So I'm not super concerned about offense with that double big lineup.
Next question. And I don't even think we need to get too deep into this one, but the fans want it. What does success look like for JJ Reddick? Like in this media circus, almost every betting app has the Lakers at 43.5 wins. And I don't know a single smart person who thinks the Lakers are a real threat to get to the finals this year. Forget win a title. It's a really tough position to be in as a first-time coach. And there's a world where JJ Reddick is a really good NBA coach, and this goes poorly. On a team where many will argue D'Angelo Russell is your 4th best player, prime LeBron easily could have dragged this roster to a title. That's not who we're dealing with anymore. Is it 48 wins and you get to round 2? Like, yeah,
that'd be success. I think.
Yeah.
I don't think
you'd have to consider that success. And yet it'll probably come with a lot of drama and ESPN morning slander because he's not in the room anymore. I bet Stephen A is going to take some swings. Yeah, I'm just worried for JJ Reddick. Love JJ Reddick. This is my childhood. I really felt like life was moving too fast when Reddick went on the low post to like talk about his preparations for this Lakers season. Yeah. So what the hell does success look like for rookie coach JJ Reddick?
Yeah, I had a similar question to this of just was that stuff LeBron and KD stuff that we saw in the Olympics just a feel good last chapter, or do they have more important basketball left? I think KD probably has the clearest path to important basketball because he's probably got the best team around him, being paired with Booker and Beal, and they added some point guard depth. I think the Lakers and Suns are fairly close in terms of team quality. Budenholzer, I think, is going to squeeze every ounce of regular season wins that he can out of that Suns team. And then the Warriors are a very flawed roster as well, with Steph, who probably has the most like regular season juice of him, LeBron, and KD at this point. But like the secondary offensive option, I don't even know who it is. It's like maybe a Kuminga going into his fourth year, but I'm not totally on board that train. Does Pajemski take a big step in year two? Draymond's the second best player on that team, but he's not an offensive option by any stretch. But for the Lakers, I do think there are some encouraging things. Like they had a very good record last year when they started the lineup that they're going to start this year of D'Lo, Reeves, LeBron, Rui, and Anthony Davis. Is that a lineup that can make it to the conference finals in the current state of the West? I don't think so. But it's a playoff team, I think, with that configuration that can beat almost anyone in a first round series if LeBron is playing at like Captain L'America levels. So I think success, I hate to say it, it's gonna. I think this. I don't know what success is, but I think their season's gonna look a lot like it's looked in the last couple years, except maybe with a little bit less anxiety in terms of having to make a last ditch run down the end of the season to make the playoffs. But like this team's not going to be a top four seed in the West. They're probably going to be in the LeBron James annual play-in tournament, which he lambasted when it first came about, but now he's been in it every single year. And yeah, I'm confident they're going to have a good offense. Like they had once they kind of figured out their rotation down the end of the season last year, they were, I think, a top 10 offense. And I would, with some of the off ball movement that Reddick's been implementing and some of the guys they have coming in, like hopefully a healthier Gabe Vincent, connect as a spacer. I think their offensive talent and process should be better this year, but it's not close to the top tier of the teams in the West. So I don't know what that comes out to. That we might get a play-in with all of Phoenix, the Warriors, and the Lakers. I'm a little dubious on the Warriors even making it to the play-in with the strength of the West up and down, but yeah, I don't know what success is. Second round?
All right, your turn.
All right.
I've got like three more.
Okay, if you have one you really like, go for it.
Who will be this year's Minnesota, aka the super talented roster hiding in plain sight that coalesces into a surprise conference finalist? I can't believe I'm doing this to myself, but gun to my head here, I'm going Cleveland.
Ooh.
This year could go in so many drastically different ways for the Cavs, but I think the sexy ceiling is still in play. It would take a Garland bounce back, another Mobley half step, and new coach Kenny Atkinson injecting competitive will that I thought Cleveland was lacking long before the injuries versus Boston in this past round two. But a Garland, Mitchell, Strus, Mobley, Allen closing five with Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, and rookie Jalen Tyson off the bench, like that remains a dangerous core group that nobody wants to see in round one. And I'll leave it at that. I also put Phoenix with 6 question marks just because I've been very dismissive of Phoenix, and they made moves around the margins that could significantly change their fortunes this year.
Yeah, I like both those picks. I'd throw in Milwaukee in the mix as well, though they wouldn't be as surprising.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I think it would take more than a half step from Evan Mobley. One of my questions was, can Evan Mobley take an offensive leap? Which was sparked by seeing two clips of him looking fluid offensively from the preseason. But he's the key that unlocks their future. And he was better in last year's playoffs than he was in years prior, but teams just don't really respect him that much offensively in the playoffs. He's not developed enough as a shooter to be able to play outside, and he's not quite physical and strong enough to be able to play inside. So he's a bit in this kind of in between zone on offense where it's unclear exactly what the best way is to deploy him. If he has an offensive leap and becomes a good offensive player, which I would say he's not currently like a good offensive player, he's probably around average.
Max is reacting to me shaking my head.
They need that to really crack the top crust of the
Yeah.
East. Mitchell dragging a subpar offensive supporting cast is just not enough to compete with Boston, with New York, with Philadelphia if they're healthy, or Milwaukee. And yeah, Freudian slip. Yeah, so it all hinges, I think, on Evan Mobley. Like all eyes are on that 2021 draft class. I had another question about Cade. Is the Cade breakout finally happening with the spacing environment that he has this year? But Mobley is in that same boat in the 2021 class. Like we know he's a defensive player of the year level defender, but can he just be good on offense, particularly in playoff situations? Because if he can, then you're dealing with like a real potential star on your hands. And at this point, I think it's still unclear if he's quite that good.
Yeah, I think Mobley is so skilled for a center and a little bit messy offensively for a forward, which is what he's had to be because Jared Allen is so good. Okay, hit me.
Well, I mentioned the Cade one, so I'll bring it up. I think the Pistons are going to be better than a lot of people think this year. Were sports betting legal in California, I might even place a wager on Pistons to go over 24 and a half wins, which I'm sure I would be sweating out come April. But this is a team that just was not a real NBA organization last year. They hired a coach in Monty Williams who really clearly didn't want to be there. They just kept offering him more and more money until he agreed to coach them. And now I think it's a much better, from a team building perspective, it's a much better environment for Cade's skill sets. They have a lot more shooting between adding Malik Beasley, who's a high volume 40% 3-point shooter, Tobias Harris, who's a good shooter for whatever faults he may have, as sort of a, you don't want him as your 30, $40 million player, but as a solid fifth starter, sure. And Fontecchio was a really good pickup for them as a shooter last year. They got Hardaway, who, if nothing else, can shoot the ball. And this is now the time where we should be able to see Cade operate with Jalen Duren in that pick and roll in space and actually be a high level offensive player. And I think he had an underrated season last year. Like he's already one of the better mid range scorers in the NBA. His mid range production was like on par with Joel Embiid and Devin Booker in terms of number of makes per game and the percentage he was shooting on those. Like they were all around like 4 mid-range attempts per game and shooting about 48% on those. And that's a good place for a third-year guy to be, particularly in that cramped of an offensive environment. So I'm really excited to see what he looks like with more space around him and a real kind of NBA roster. Same with Jaden Ivey to a lesser degree, who we were both super high on in the draft and has looked absolutely dynamite in preseason. So Pistons, I think, could be sneaky fun. And Cade, I think we're kind of approaching the end of is that all-star leap? Is that all-star in there? Like that perennial all-star in there? We would have, I think, seen it by this year, or maybe he gets one more year of grace. But then it starts becoming like, okay, well then how good can he be exactly if he's not going to be sort of number one pick good?
Speak for yourself. I'm the Hodor of the Cade Cunningham Island. I'm holding the door. Okay. My next question. With two brand new starters, Paul George and Caleb Martin, and at least half of their projected rotation consisting of newcomers, Eric Gordon, Jared McCain, Yabusele, the Dancing Bear,
Yabu.
star of the Olympics, can the Philadelphia 76ers put the pieces together in time to be a capital C contender in the 25 playoffs? I don't know if we need to go super deep into this one. We're not going to get an answer on October 10th. I can't wait to see it. And, the Clippers are always the first team that comes to mind. Like, it's really hard to put a core together this quickly and like be successful. We'll see what Nick Nurse can do.
Yeah, one concern I have with their team is I don't think they have a ton of size, physicality, strength
Yeah.
outside of Joel Embiid. Like the rest of that roster or the rest of that starting lineup, Maxi, for as much as we love him, he's like 6'2". He can be pushed around. Oubre competes, but he's skinny. He can be pushed around. Caleb Martin is a grinder, but he's not a power forward, and they're starting him at power forward, and he's going to get pushed around against the other fours in the league. And Paul George is much more of a finesse player as well. Really up and down the roster, they're much more of a finesse team. And I worry about them in a matchup against like Milwaukee or the Knicks or even the Celtics, a team that has a lot of size and can really pick on players who who don't have the physical profile to be able to guard and really bang and compete at that level defensively in the playoffs. So I do worry about that for them, which is why actually I thought the pickup of Yabusele could be huge if he can maintain his level of shooting from the Olympics, because he's a rare person on that team who is actually like built in a brick house and can like bang against, Giannis or the Knicks wings or some of the stuff we see in the West, Tatum as well. And I think that's a component that you need. You can't just be a finesse team in the playoffs. You need to have some level of physicality and grit and strength. And I do worry a little bit if they're too much of a finesse unit to match up with the teams at the top of the East. All right, I'm not going to make you ask this question, and we don't really have to spend any time on it because it's purely speculative. But can Scoot Henderson bounce back and become the player that everyone thought he would be, getting drafted number 2 overall? And I thought, as a draft prospect, that he would have gone number 1 in most drafts. Like I would have taken him over Paolo number 1. I would have taken him this year number 1 without a doubt. So can he follow the pattern of some of the star point guards before him, De'Aaron Fox, Russell Westbrook, Darius Garland, and overcome historically inefficient rookie seasons to then figure their way out into stardom at the point guard position?
The finishing will be the main factor I'm focused on this year. Like I really liked what he was doing at the end of the year. He was more secure with the ball. His mid-range pull-ups were crisp and reliable. The finishing was generally what surprised me in a negative way last year. And I think he's going to become more composed and more creative at the rim. And he's got Donovan Clingan now, in addition to DeAndre Ayton. And I think Donovan Clingan is just like, that's like, to me, almost like giving like Travis Kelce to a young quarterback. I think Donovan Clingan is going to make Scoot's life easier on both ends in so many ways. Yeah, and this isn't just because my team drafted Clingan. Like I had him as the 3rd best player on my board, and I think getting him at 7 was a draft night miracle.
I've got one more. Do you have one more?
I have one more too, and it's a pretty brief one. I just wrote down: are the Houston Rockets already an awesome machine of a regular season team? Could they just win 50 games in the West? And
50.
crazier things have happened. I mean, the Thunder were the 1 seed last year. And the Mavs got to the finals, and a lot of people had the Mavs as a play-in team. Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Şengün, Amen Thompson, Reed Shepherd, Tari Eason, Steven Adams, Cam Whitmore. Like this is not a fun team to have to run with in your 4th game in 5 nights, which obviously isn't every week of the NBA schedule. But if this team was upper 40s in wins because Ime Udoka just brings them together in a major way, and Şengün continues to grow on his trajectory toward becoming like an offensive superstar, and Jabari Smith starts to make me look less dumb for having him at number 1 in his class, and Dylan the villain is just doing his his stuff, and Jalen Green, scores more efficiently, and like, the hot shooting streaks of last year become more the norm for him. Fred VanVleet had an awesome underrated season last year. this could just be sort of like maybe Orlando West, just a team that
Hmm.
isn't the most dangerous in the playoffs, but has so much depth and energy and youth and fresh legs and athleticism on a night to night basis that they're outpacing a lot of teams that are perhaps more dangerous postseason squads.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're gonna do a league pass draft at any point, but the Rockets I think would be pretty high on my last year's lottery teams of who I want to be watching this year. They were the 10th best defense in the league last year, and I'm expecting that to get better with the addition of Steven Adams and the progression of the young guys between the addition of Reed Shepherd, who is already, I think, a defensive playmaker, and then the Amen Thompson getting better. Maybe he can steal Dylan Brooks' starting spot. We'll see, or Jalen Green's starting spot for that matter. Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason coming back because he missed a lot of last year with an injury. All those guys I expect to get better defensively. Jabari Smith as well. So defensively, I could see them also in the second year under Ime Udoka and learning his system, creeping up towards that top five. So fully with you there. Last year, they won 2/3 of their home games. They were 27-14 at home. This is a team that old teams on a road trip are there's going to be a lot of nights where they just get run off the floor, particularly by that second unit. Just the amount of overpowering athleticism that they have, especially on the bench. Amen Thompson might be the single best athlete in the entire NBA. Combined with Cam Whitmore, who's a 40-inch vertical built like a truck, and Tari Eason, who's just like a relentless, fast, jump high, long, and then the dogs that they have in starting lineup as well. So their big issue last year was they were 14-27 on the road. That's emblematic of a young team. You would expect that to get a little bit better. So if they keep going 27-14 at home and they get that road record a little closer to 500, that could be like an extra 5 wins or so. So I'm with you. I expect the Rockets to be really competitive, and I would not be surprised if they end up knocking out one of like the Warriors or the Lakers or the Clippers from that play-in mix, just with the way that they dominate relatively in the regular season compared to those older, slower, more mentally tired teams.
Yeah.
Can't get to 50, but I can see 45, 46. My last one, kind of just a vehicle to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, but I'm really curious what Zach Edey is going to look like in the modern NBA. And this might be a really niche one, but he was a fascinating prospect to scout in the draft because we've never seen someone who we know so much and so little about, just because the college game is so different from the pro game. Edey's been on the national stage for like 4 years now. Like he played with Jaden Ivey when he was at Purdue, and then he played the year after that and the year after that. And he's been on the international stage playing for Team Canada. And when I was scouting him, I was watching him just completely physically dominate everyone he went against, except for Donovan Clingan, who's also going to be one of the biggest players in the NBA this year. And just thought to myself, is there a world where just no one can guard him one-on-one? He's an automatic double team every time he gets the ball. He gets, 40% of the offensive rebounds for any given team, and gets you in the bonus like 5 or 6 minutes into every quarter because no one can guard him one-on-one. They're hacking him, they're fouling him. He's got good touch on his free throws. I feel like he might be able to add a sporadic 3-point jumper at some point down the line. And he's just so massive. 7'4", 7'10" wingspan. Like, what is that going to look like in the NBA? But then the other part of me would see games where he just gets put into pick and roll over and over again. And just though he tries and his foot speed is better than you would expect for someone of that size, it's the laws of physics. He has forces that he's working against that he just can't overcome at times in terms of moving his feet and changing directions. Can that work in the modern NBA? And I ended up kind of splitting the difference and putting him around 15 or 16. But there were parts of me that wanted to put him at, 2, and parts of me that wanted to have him towards the back half of the first round. And I probably played it too safe. Maybe I should have put him higher, but really curious to see what he looks like with Memphis. And if he can approximate some of that Steven Adams role that they really missed once Adams got hurt.
We are less than 2 weeks away from the start of the NBA regular season. Knicks Celtics, October 22nd, 7:30 Eastern. It's a Tuesday. Wow. Eastern Conference Finals preview, perhaps. This one was really fun. and we'll be back soon. Peace.
Boris Dirk.